All right, we're going to get started with anaerobic program design and looking at how do we create a resistance training program. So let's go ahead and look at this lecture. So first, we want to recall what we said about the difference between aerobic and anaerobic. Our last lecture, aerobic exercise prescription, is exercises that use oxygen to make ATP and usually are longer in duration, whereas anaerobic is a type of energy system that does not require oxygen to make energy. And when we do resistance training, we use a different fuel source than oxygen to create energy or ATP. And so that's what the anaerobic part means. We're going to look at the importance of designing training programs in a health-related field. Like, why do we need to know this? Know what variables should be addressed and how to address them, and then be familiar with how to create training program for children, adolescents, young adults, athletes, and healthy older adults. So first thing, I'll put all of these up here, is looking at principles of resistance training. And so this is just like the basic definition of each one. Progressive overload basically says that we need to increase the stress placed on our body over time in order to continue to see adaptations. And so an example of this would be slowly increasing the weight that we're lifting on a certain exercise once our body has gotten accustomed to that exercise and no longer sees any changes, such as no longer experiencing fatigue or no longer experiencing soreness. We want to increase that stress slowly so we can continue to see improvements. Specificity means we want to mimic the sport that we're playing in our workouts. So this is very sport specific for athletes. So we want to match the movements, the techniques, the muscles, the energy systems that are used in the sport, and we want to train those during our workouts and our practice. Reversibility just says that when we stop training, we'll see a reversal of the adaptations that we gained. And so adaptations are lost when our training ceases. The time frame in which things are reversed or slow down or lost varies for every single person, and that's going to be discussed more in like your advanced strength training courses. Variation says that we need to add variety. We need to change it up. Doing the same thing over and over again can become monotonous, lead to burnout, or it can lead to overtraining. And so when we change it up and we do different exercises or different volumes or intensities, or just different workouts in general, we are helping the body to adapt to different stimuli. And then individuality. Just remember, everybody adapts differently, even if you're all doing the same workout and exposed to the same exercise stimulus, adaptations occur differently for every single person. All right, now looking at our training goals. We talked about muscular endurance in a previous lecture. We are just doing a exercise where we're using a sub-maximal load, so a light load, and we're producing as many contractions as we can. So as many repetitions as we can over time until we hit like a goal number. Hypertrophy is about increasing muscle size. And so we're increasing the cross-sectional area of muscle fibers, which results in an increase in the total size of the muscle. And so muscle hypertrophy uses moderate resistances and moderate volumes to achieve this. Strength, we talked about, is producing as much force as you can against a maximal or near maximal resistance. When we do this, we actually may not see a large change in muscle size because the volume that we are achieving with strength workouts is usually really low. We're just trying to produce as much force as possible, and usually that's done with very few repetitions and a very heavy weight. And then power, we already know, is producing as much force as you can while contracting quickly. And so it's taking like a submaximal to near maximal load, but trying to contract against that load as quickly as possible. So with program design, we use variables, which is the fit principle, but we can take it, it's like fit and then RVP. And so how often, how hard, how long, what kind, how the rest period should be, how much volume should we do, and then how should we progress over time. So first, frequency, basically it talks about how often should we do our workouts. And so this is for resistance training only. And we usually say for just like a novice person, 2 times per week. This is for a healthy older adult, not older adult, sorry, a healthy adult. It can also be for an older adult, but just like a healthy adult in general, about 2 times per week. And that's usually hitting like full body. So full body session 2 times a week, or you can break it up and do split routines where we're doing upper body, lower, upper, lower. But what also affects frequency is someone's training status. The more trained they are, the more likely they are to be lifting weights in the gym to further see improvement. Sports season, if you're in season or off season, will influence this. How heavy you're going or how technical your lifts are may also change your frequency. And then other training schedules, like doing aerobic exercise or playing a sport or doing yoga or Tai Chi or whatever else you do. Next, looks at type of exercises. We have different categories to where we would classify exercises. The first one is called a core exercise category, but it's not referring to like your abdominal muscles. Core is referring to like your main multi-joint exercises. These multi-joint have at least two joints involved, either like the shoulders and the elbows or like the knees and the hips. And so these are your compound lifts. They recruit a lot of muscle area. Assistance exercise are single joint. So I'm either just using my shoulder or my elbows or my knees or my hips. They recruit smaller muscle areas and they're not as important to program when we're trying to improve like sport performance because they're not as applicable to sports as your compound movements are. Structural exercises are the core exercises that load the spine. So anything with the bar is placed on your back, racked across your shoulders, over your head. And then also like deadlift is an indirect structural exercise that indirectly loads the spine. So think like back squat, front squat, deadlift, shoulder press, or any power exercises, but they have their own category because they're performed explosively. And then sport specific exercises are different for every single athlete. These are just movements that mimic a sport movement, like lunges for a runner, or doing anything with triple extension, which is the movement at the ankles, hips, and knees for somebody who jumps. And so it's just mimicking a movement with a resistance lift. So question here, order. Should we do strength or cardio first? And then does it really matter how we order our exercises at the gym? And so, question is yes, exercise order is important. And we want to do the hardest exercises first. So we want to do all of our power exercises, anything that's done explosively with a heavy load. So barbell power lifts are done first. Followed by core multi-joint exercises, usually with heavy loads. And then we can save our assistant single joint exercises for the very end. When you schedule like circuit type work, like high intensity type training, that can kind of go anywhere because you're kind of trying to achieve like a different outcome. But anyway, this is kind of the order in which we should follow. The other question right here is, should we do strength or cardio first? This depends on your goal. If your goal is to train for cardiovascular fitness, then it's important to do your running, your aerobic exercise first. But if your goal is mainly just to be strong and powerful and increase muscle size, then probably do all your strength workouts first, followed by like a light jog after. All right, here's some other arrangements that we can do is alternating upper and lower body exercises. We can do this with a circuit. A circuit is usually at least 3 exercises performed like all back to back before you go back to that very first one. This helps train cardiovascular fitness as well as muscular endurance. Push-pull exercises helps to ensure that you're not training the same muscle twice, if that's your goal. So you would do an exercise that requires pushing and then an exercise that requires pulling. A succession set is doing 2 exercises back to back with no rest in between until you finished both of those exercises. A superset is usually agonist, antagonist, back to back. So an agonist muscle area like the biceps, followed by antagonist triceps. A compound set would be doing the same muscle area back to back because we're compounding the stress onto one area, such as doing squats and then doing lunges. We're hitting the quads and the glutes really hard. And then a complex set would be doing a core lift and a power lift back to back. So I'm going to do front squat and then I'm going to do hang cleans and then front squat and then hang cleans. So doing a core lift, power lift, back to back. Next is talking about load or intensity. So there are three words we use interchangeably here. That's intensity, load, and weight. They all mean like how heavy are you lifting? How intense are you going? What weight are you using? And so what's the load? Amount of weight assigned to an exercise. We can do this in two ways. We can take a percent of a 1 RM or we can prescribe an RM. And so a 1 RM is how much weight you can lift one time and you could not do it twice. That's your true 1 RM. And then a repetition maximum is the most weight you lift for a specified number of reps, such as like a 5 RM. Like I choose a weight that I know that I can lift on bench press 5 times, but I can't lift it 6 times because it's too heavy and I wouldn't be able to do it. And so that's like a RM, 3 RM, 5 RM, 10 RM. But it's very heavy for that amount of repetitions. This chart is used in advanced strength training programs in order to prescribe resistance. It's not something I will ever ask you about or like have you memorize. But what we do know is there's an inverse relationship between the percent 1 RM and how many repetitions we're able to do. And so the higher the percent 1 RM, the fewer repetitions that you're able to perform. And so this chart's used, whereas if we want to do 10 repetitions, it doesn't matter what our 1 RM is. We don't even have to know it. But if we're doing 10 repetitions at a very heavy load, then we're probably at about 75% of our 1 RM. Whatever that 1 RM is on that lift, we're at about 75% of it if we're doing a true 10 RM. If we're doing 4 reps and those 4 reps are really heavy and we couldn't do 5 reps on back squat, then you're probably training at about 90% of your 1 RM. And so that's how this chart is used. Like I said, I use this in my advanced strength training class, and so you don't have to memorize anything until you get there. But what we also want to understand is that there's repetitions and percent 1 RM for each of those training goals that we learned a second ago. But if we looked in here at this colored chart, this training chart basically says that all the effects of each training goal are actually blended together. But when we do use a certain repetition range, we are aiming for a certain outcome. And so if we're doing a repetition range that's 6 or less, it usually says the weight's really heavy. And so that's going to be some sort of strength or power focus. And if we're in a moderate zone, such as like 6 to 12 repetitions with a moderate resistance, that's like a hypertrophy zone. In muscular endurance, about 12 repetitions or greater. That's the zone we're training in for improvements in endurance. But all the effects are blended, like you can kind of see across that chart. But there is usually a specific goal repetition range and load range for each of those goals. And then we get set number. So we already learned those or looked at those repetitions. And now we see that each goal also has like a specified number of sets to do. This is how we would be able to calculate someone's volume. We can calculate load volume and repetition volume. Like how many total repetitions did you do in your entire workout versus what's your load volume? We would get how many reps you did, how many sets you did, as well as what the resistance was that you were using. And that can tell us your total load volume for a workout. And then last is looking at rest periods. With rest periods, each training goal has a specified rest. We see that strength and power have like the greatest amount of rest because that's the hardest. These are the hardest training goals. And we want to be as recovered as possible before we go back to the next set. And so the purpose of rest periods is basically to replenish all your energy and to clear away any acidity that the body has accumulated during the workout. And then we see hypertrophy, 30 to 90 seconds. We're partially recovered, but this is the type of stimulus that allows muscles to grow. Muscle growth occurs a lot of the time during a stressful environment. And so that's what we have our rest for there. And then muscular endurance, 30 seconds or less for two reasons, because the load's really light, but then also the purpose of endurance is working and working and working over and over again, especially when your body's becoming fatigued. And so what determines rest periods? Obviously, the goal that you're focusing on, as well as your training status, how trained you are, and then how heavy that you're lifting for that time. So yeah, that is basically our very quick, brief lecture. I want to know how confident you feel on a scale of 1 to 10 about designing your own resistance training program. Just kind of curious about that. Kind of think about where you fall. Obviously, I went through all of these training variables very quickly, but you can take some time and go back and review the lecture and just kind of understand each variable a little bit more. And hopefully, learning about these variables will help you kind of go in and customize your own workouts in the gym. So, I hope you enjoyed this lecture of anaerobic resistance training, and we'll see you in the next block. Okay.